wee bit of a technical issue. Yep, a wee bit of a technical issue to get up and running today. But yes, sent to test us. So I'm Mo. Thanks very much for joining our Q&A session today. We've got a bit of a special extended Q&A session today, which I'm really glad about now because we're late in starting. So that we can cover the recent announcement from the EMA about the future of obeticholic acid in Europe. So we've got Professor Jones with us today. We will do some other Q&As as well, so please just remember that these Q&As don't take the place of a consultation with your own clinician, and these sessions we're aiming to provide general medical information and not medical advice. Remember to Facebook's a public forum. If you want some more privacy, you can join us here in the meeting room and click meeting. Professor Jones, can you give us an overview of the current situation, please?
Yes. There's an old joke about a woman driving a very posh car through the countryside, and she stops the car and says to the old man leaning on the gate, "My man, how do I get to London?" And he said, "Oh, if I was going to London, I wouldn't go from here." So we're in a difficult position with obeticholic acids. What I'm going to do is tell you exactly what's happened, give you some understanding of why it happened, and be very, very clear about what it means for people. And it doesn't necessarily mean as much as people think it is. There is a lot of misinformation out there. I was involved in the whole process at the center of it all. So please take what I say as chapter and verse, because I was more involved with this than any other clinician. So that's important. The advice will differ according to where you live, for reasons that I will explain. Okay, so we decided that I would just do this at the beginning because there are bound to be questions. I could see them coming through already, and so it made sense just to, in a sense, give you chapter and verse. But I think it's fair to say it is a complete mess, and is a mess of the European Medicines Agency's making, and hopefully that mess will get sorted out. So just to rewind, drugs are usable if they are approved for use. So quite correctly, there is a process whereby a new drug or an old drug in a different disease is tested to see whether it's effective and is safe, two sides of the coin, safe and effective. And then on the basis of that evidence, decisions are made by what are called regulatory bodies about whether it's licensed for use. So you'll be, certainly people in the UK, be very familiar with the BNF, the book that doctors always used to flick through. And that's a list of every drug that is licensed in the UK. Okay. So it's very important. It's a legal approval to use it. By law, a doctor cannot prescribe a drug which is not licensed other than using it in a clinical trial. So obviously, when drugs are being trialed, they're not licensed at that point. So there's a whole legal framework around that, and that's what we all operate in. And many people on this call have been involved in clinical trials over the years. The PBC community are phenomenal at taking part in trials, and that's one of the reasons why there's been so much progress in PBC. So there is a process by which drugs are decided on in terms of their safety and their effectiveness. And if that is decided as positive, they are given a license. Okay. The other side of we'll come back to that. The other side of the coin is what's happened over the last 30 years, which is the sort of non-scientific side of it. And one of the things that I think is really important for people to realize is that PBC has changed out of all recognition over the last 30 years. So I first did a PBC clinic in 1991. So I have the long view of this. I was managing PBC patients before URSO came along. And the disease was totally different to how it is now, totally different. Half of all the people we saw in the clinic in 1991 would have had jaundice, half of them. Okay, the majority would have had cirrhosis. Primary biliary cirrhosis as a name was the correct name because most people had cirrhosis. And yet what we see now is I have nobody who comes to my clinic who is jaundiced. We have less than 1 in 20 people have cirrhosis. It has changed out of all recognition. In the 90s, people would die of PBC. Now, very, very few people die of PBC. They have transplants in a small number of cases. The vast majority of people reach the end of their life and die of something completely different while still having PBC, dying with as opposed to dying of. So of all the things that we've done over the years, something works. Some of what we do clearly works because the disease has changed completely. So there is a reality to what we see that tells us what has been effective or not. And those are the two ends of the spectrum of information, the very narrow specific clinical trial versus what in a way is blatantly obvious from our experience over the years and your experience in the clinic. So, obeticholic acid was licensed. It was the second drug licensed in PBC after ursodeoxycholic acid, and it was licensed 8 years ago by the European Medicines Agency and then also by the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration in America, and then also regulatory bodies around the world, Australia, Canada, etc., etc., etc. But all 28, as were European countries, it was regulated through the European Medicines Agency. Now, since Brexit, the UK is not regulated by the European Medicines Agency, and what they say has nothing to do with the UK, and I will come back to that. We are regulated by the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, MHRA, which was actually the world's first regulatory body. So we've gone back to an old system. That's incredibly important for people in the UK because the EMA guidance has no impact here at all. So to cut the long story short, if you're in the UK, obeticholic acid is exactly the same now as it was 2 weeks ago. We use it, we prescribe it, we continue with it, we're doing trials of it. The EMA, in a sense, can do whatever it wants. It does not apply in the UK. It does not apply anywhere outside the European 27 countries. I am aware we have people from all around the world, but a lot of people from the UK. So kind of I've given the punchline away. This does not apply. And if your doctor says to you, you must stop it because the EMA, that is incorrect. Guidance is going out to UK doctors today to make that crystal clear to them. And if people are having any trouble with it, we can, in fact, we will forward to Mo and Robert the UK guidance to clinicians to pass on to everybody, to pass on to their clinician. We'll come back.
If anyone has problems with that, please reach out to us.
So we'll come back to that. So rare diseases. PBC is a rare disease and it's a slowly progressive condition. It's really difficult to do trials in it, okay? Not getting people to take part. As I said, the PBC community are brilliant, but there aren't millions of you, and so it's difficult. And also many people have mild disease, and so critical questions about more badly affected people and how they respond to treatment are difficult to do, okay? And they're also difficult to do because PBC is a disease that only changes over a long period of time. It progresses only very slowly. And so if you're going to do a trial with a placebo arm, and you know, that's an issue with trials, a dummy tablet, you're asking people to take an active drug or an alternative, which is the active drug or a dummy tablet. People will do that for a length of time, but they won't do it for 5 years or 10 years. Why would you? And particularly if the drug is available, why would you go into a trial where you might get a dummy tablet when you've been told you're in a high-risk group, when you can get a prescription for the tablet for whatever, in the UK, £11 a month or something like that? It's unreasonable to expect people to do that. And I wouldn't expect a family member to do it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't expect you to do it. So that's the problem. So obeticholic acid was approved on the basis of the fact that it really quickly and universally improved alkaline phosphatase. And alkaline phosphatase is the measure that we have all used forever to measure the severity of the disease. Okay, it's what you ask about in the clinic. It's the measure we all use. It is in all of the guidelines that European doctors and doctors around the world are told to use to monitor the disease. We talk to you endlessly about knowing your numbers. So this measure is strongly associated with how active the disease is. Obeticholic acid rapidly and dramatically improves that and normalizes it in many people. And on that basis, A brilliant point about insulin. I'll come back to that. So on that basis, obeticholic acid was given what's called a conditional approval. So that's what happens in diseases that are rare, where it's very difficult to have all the evidence up front. So you get the opportunity to use it in practice. On that basis, we've used this quite happily for 8 years, and many, literally thousands of patients around the world have taken this drug, and the vast majority of them, it has really benefited them. They can see the improvement in their tests. They usually feel better with it. Now, there are two problems with obeticholic acid. So I am giving you the most balanced opinion I can possibly give in this, because there needs to be balance. So obeticholic acid does two things you need to be aware of. People with bad cirrhosis, okay, it can make them worse, not better. And when it was first used in America, there were some problems with this, but that was because it was being used by inexperienced people in the wrong patients. These were people who needed transplant, to be frank, not a drug. Now, we have seen none of those problems in the UK, very few of those problems in Europe, because we use it in a different way. So this is a powerful drug that should be used by grown-ups who know what they're doing. I don't think anybody would argue with that.
I think it's a good point to say is that it's not safety related, because there has been some concerns about that. This is nothing to do with the safety of the drug.
Yes, so we made a change with obeticholic acid about 4 years ago to only use it in a particular group of people, who are those people who are high risk of progressing in the future but have not progressed yet. Now, that is 90% of the people who we worry about. So that doesn't stop the treatment in the vast majority of people. It just makes sure you take the risk away. Okay. But there are people who, for whatever reason, want to hark back to mistakes, to be frank, that were made in management by North American doctors. It's as simple as that. We live and learn. We use drugs in different ways. And that was a group of people who this was not the right thing to do in. You know, it was only a slight risk, but it was a risk, and we stopped using the drug and never intended to go back to doing that. In the UK, we never saw that problem because, to be truthful, we never treated people with the drug in that position. And then the other thing which crops up is itch. So obeticholic acid can make itch a little bit worse in PBC. Okay, and PBC and itch, obviously, don't have to tell Mo about this. Itch is a feature of PBC. However, the problem of obeticholic acid and itch is a completely manageable problem. As people will know from my sessions before, I have a particular interest in symptoms. We run a specialist symptom clinic. I see people from all around the country, around the world, with really bad itch. And interestingly, not a single one of the people I've seen from around the world with bad itch has been treated with obeticholic acid. So to talk to the regulators, you'd think that itch was invented when obeticholic acid was given to people. But that's nonsense. Itch is part PBC. It can make it a little bit worse. You can treat it out as you do ordinary itch. Adjust the dose of obeticholic acid. It's literally a non-problem. You need to be aware of it. You need to talk to people about it, and you need to take it on board and manage it. But that's not a reason to not use a treatment. That would be like saying to take somebody's asked to talk about insulin because this is your clinical trials. It would be like saying you can't use insulin in people because some people get hypoglycemia with it. Well, yes, but that's part of how you understand the drug and manage it. So a conditionally approved drug, a requirement, there are conditions, and the conditions are that you have to confirm that it works in a subsequent study. Okay, not unreasonable. You've given it the benefit of the doubt with alkaline phosphatase, and now you have to confirm it. Okay, and that was a trial called Cobalt, which was done around the world. And the problem with Cobalt was twofold. One is a significant proportion of the people who went into that trial and took placebo worked out they were taking placebo because their bloods didn't improve, because the drug improves people rapidly, and so therefore dropped out reasonably, as they're entitled to do, and went on to obeticholic acid. Okay, so actually you ended up with both groups of people, the placebo and the active drug, taking the same drug, and lo and behold, there's no difference between them because there's no difference between them. Okay, and we find that obvious. Patients find that obvious, but regulators don't seem to find that obvious. And then the other problem with Cobalt is that it included a small group of people who were going to run into problems in a short period of time, in whom the drug doesn't work. We know it doesn't work now. And then there was a larger group of people who weren't going to run into problems in the short period of time, but also weren't going to be able to show any benefit with the drug in terms of dying or needing a transplant. So Cobalt couldn't answer the question. So what it boils down to this. Cobalt, we had to do the Cobalt trial to show evidence of benefit. We were told the design by the European Medicines Agency. We told them it wouldn't work, and it didn't work. It didn't answer the question. It didn't show that obeticholic acid worked. It didn't show that obeticholic acid didn't work. It didn't show anything. So it couldn't answer the question. There are, however, multiple studies from around the world from many researchers, all independent of the company that make obeticholic acid, all showing beyond any doubt that obeticholic acid works and improves survival. And it's exactly the same studies that underpin why we use ursodeoxycholic acid. Every study, half a dozen from around the world, involving probably about 10,000 patients, as opposed to 200 in the Cobalt trial, all show beyond doubt that this drug is beneficial, and it also shows beyond doubt, when used in the right people by the right people, it is a completely safe drug. So the information is overwhelming, and those people on the call who have taken obeticholic acid will be able to say what I say is true. This drug is fine for most people, just need to be aware of the itch, but it will rapidly and sustainably improve the test that we know to show risk in PBC. Okay, so, and everybody improves. We've done studies for 7 years now, so it never changes over 7 years. It never changes. It doesn't wear off. It doesn't stop working. It just carries on working for all that period of time. We have Intercept and Advans, the companies that make it, have been incredibly responsible about this. And they have collected information on every patient in the world who has ever been treated with obeticholic acid. They know something like 8,000 patient years of treatment about its safety. We know its safety inside out. There is no problem about safety with this drug at all, as long as you don't use it in people with end-stage cirrhosis, which we now know and don't do. So essentially what it boiled down to is the exercise ought to be about the truth. What's the truth here? Because regulators would turn around and say, we are protecting patients, which they are, but you don't protect patients by denying them a treatment that helps them. However, you also don't help patients by letting them take a treatment that's harmful to them. So there is risk both ways. But I'm afraid what we had was the most dogmatic, pig-headed, bonkers process I have ever been involved with. I'm sorry these are strong words, but this has blown our minds over the last few weeks, that there was a complete unwillingness to consider anything other than the one study, Cobalt. And even though they accepted there's lots of evidence, they're not going to listen to it because we told you how to do this study. You did this study, it didn't show benefit. The fact it didn't show harm and it didn't show anything is neither here nor there to them. It didn't show benefit, therefore you haven't shown benefit, therefore the drug will be withdrawn. Okay, it's literally insane. I don't know if it's stupidity or vested interests or whatever. I don't want to go into all of that, but this is not a decision that is in the best interests of PBC patients. If you had any doubt this is bonkers, that the European Medicines Agency say two things in the same document. One is there is no evidence this drug works, therefore it will be withdrawn. And then later on they say we understand that patients will be upset and will be caused harm by this drug being withdrawn, and this is up to clinicians to manage. Okay, hang on a second, guys. Either it doesn't work or it does. You can't say it doesn't work and then accept that people will be made worse by stopping it. If anyone can explain that logic, please let me know, because I can't explain the logic. Okay. I'm sorry to say there were patients involved in this decision-making process, and I don't know what happened in the behind closed doors discussions, but I think that's a real sadness, because patients should have been stamping their feet and giving the patient's view about this. I did as much as I could, as other experts did, but we were not listened to. So on that basis, the European Medicines Agency has recommended that the license be taken away. That is now not official yet. It has to be ratified by the European Commission in Europe, the European 27 countries. And so on the PBC Foundation website is Ursula van der Leyden's email address. If you think this is a crazy decision that does not listen to patients and is not in the best interests of patients, feel free to drop her an email. Okay. And we have been told that is very influential. Okay. If this is faithless bureaucrats in a committee making decisions on your behalf without involving you in it properly, drop her an email and say how unhappy you are with it. Our viewpoint is that I'm perfectly able, with you as a patient, to weigh up the risks and benefits for you, and on that basis make a decision whether that drug is the right drug for you. And there'll be people on this call who've been patients of mine, and they will testify. That's what I've done for every drug I've ever used in any patient. It is always, here are the pros, here are the cons. But you can't say a drug doesn't work when it patently works in terms of people's improvement. And you enter into a Kafkaesque situation where you are stopping a drug because you couldn't do a trial to prove that the drug worked because the drug so obviously worked. And take a step back and say this is madness of the first order. So where we are exactly for the EU 27 countries, this decision is undergoing ratification. Please do drop Ursula van der Leyden an email to say how fond you are of the process. And I think a sheer weight of now is your time. We
need your help.
We work on your behalf. You have no idea how much time and effort I put in on your behalf, as Mo does, as Robert does, as the foundation does. Now, please you do the same, because they need to have 5,000 emails. Okay, not all written the same text, not all cut and paste. Tell them what you think of this. Now's your chance to get your voice heard, because they're not listening at the moment. Okay,
and all that information that patients need is on the website. So we've been updating the website with each of the press releases that we've had, and then with feedback from the foundation as well, and we'll continue to do that as new information comes in. So there's two parts on the website. There's the petition that we're asking patients to sign, and there's also the two email addresses for the European Commission heads that you can email that you were mentioning there. So that information's all on the website. But if you're having any problem at all or need a bit of a hand, please just give us a call at the office and we can help with that as well. But we really do need your help. It's on our socials. Please share it. Please, far and wide, we need your help.
Right. That's the European 27. I'll talk about what then happens afterwards in a second. For the UK, we are regulated by the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Authority, and they have no plans as yet to look at obeticholic acid. So we are continuing exactly as we've always continued. But what I said before, if your clinician says it's come off the market, that is incorrect. In the UK, it remains, its status is unchanged. The recommendation is unchanged. The guidance of the professional bodies for gastroenterologists is that people continue as they have done. And if you have any problems, contact the foundation and we will speak to clinicians and forward that guidance. It's very clear. It is as clear as can be. This is, you know, in a sense, that the European Medicines Agency can do whatever it wants. In the UK, the MHRA, they will look at this. However, the process will be entirely different and the patient voice will be heard and they will see all of the evidence, and it will be a much more collaborative process than this has been. And I have no doubts whatsoever that obeticholic acid will not come off the market in the UK. That's not an official view, but I think that there's a thing called totality of the evidence. So the MHRA will look at the totality of the evidence. And given what I've said, that totality of the evidence is overwhelming. For America, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, are looking at it as part of their routine process. There will be a hearing in September around that. Certainly, my experience of that process is that it's more sensible than the EMA process has been. And they want to look at the nature of the evidence of the real-world experience of using it. The EMA just wouldn't look at it. They said, we're only looking at this one trial. The FDA is looking at what are the flaws. Now, trials are the gold standard, don't get me wrong, but you cannot, if you cannot do the trial, you can't then just say you can't use a drug because you can't do a trial. There are no trials of insulin, okay, placebo-controlled trials of insulin or antibiotics for meningitis. So sometimes you just can't do the trial and you have to look at the totality of the evidence. So I'm optimistic.
And that's the danger with this trial, isn't it? That if that model's used again, is
Yes.
likely to fail again, and that's the
Yes.
worry
So,
we've got for
yeah, and
the
so
new
that's
second
right.
line
So
therapies coming along as well. Yeah,
the
it's
worry
the model
is
that's a
obviously,
problem as well.
yeah. So we thought we were at the point where we've never had so many options for treatment in PBC, and isn't it brilliant? Okay, so you had ursodeoxycholic acid, you had obeticholic acid licensed, elafibranor has been licensed in America, likely to be licensed conditionally in Europe, and then seladelpar following on. That gives me the ability to talk about options for you as an individual and what the drug that's best for you. It's a bit like blood pressure tablets. Anyone who takes those knows that some agree with you, some that don't agree with you, but hey, there are options to look at alternatives.
Yeah.
And then you've got combinations. The worry is twofold. One is obeticholic acid does something very specific in the disease that the other drugs don't do. So it has particular actions. Some of them are shared between the drugs, and some of them are unique to obeticholic acid. So we lose something very specific in terms of benefit, which would be a shame. And then the other one is that if we can't prove in a trial that's not deliverable that a drug works, then we're not going to be able to do it for the new drugs coming along. And I'm really worried that the companies will turn around and say, this is an undoable thing. Okay, so this isn't just obeticholic acid. You can like obeticholic acid or not like obeticholic acid. This is about all the drugs, and all the companies are worried about this, and that's really important. This isn't just this drug. This is the future of all of these drugs in PBC.
Yeah.
And while you're at it, if you can't do this in PBC, you can't do it in PSC, you can't do it in autoimmune hepatitis. This kills stone dead the development of drugs in all of those rare and complicated diseases. And this is why all of the professional bodies are pushing back at this, because this is about the future of all drug development in PBC. You would be very heartened if you were to see the emails that, so I have the privilege of chairing the medical advisory board of the foundation. So in fact, coincidental that I was doing this Q&A session, but fortunate timing wise. You would be very heartened by the experts from around the world, the outrage. They're the household names in PBC, you know, Cynthia Levy, Marilyn Mayo from America, you know, John Veerling, you know, Keith Lindor. I mean, you will all know these are the real stars in PBC. Marco Carboni, you know, Andreas Kramer, Anna Leo from around Europe, you know, and all the UK. This is everybody in the field, all of one voice, all appalled on your behalf, okay, and all really worried for the future. So we all speak as one voice and need to push back. So my best guess, I don't know what will happen with, and I'll be honest with you, there is probably going to be legal action about all of this because of the process. So I don't want to talk about that. That's not my thing. I'm not involved in that. But for Europe, I don't know. It's up in the air. I don't know. For the UK, I think it's very unlikely we'll lose obeticholic acid. We mustn't allow a wrong-headed decision in a different jurisdiction to somehow leak into the UK. So we're pushing back really hard with clinicians that, you know, that decision has nothing to do with us. You know, whether you like Brexit or not, here's a bonus from Brexit, right? You know, if we hadn't
there is a question there, Dave, actually about that, saying that if the UK were to rejoin the EU in some form at some time in the future, would we still be regulated by the MHRA, or would we revert to the EMA and whatever they were doing at that time?
If we rejoined the single market and the European agencies, and this is the cutting edge of all of this, is that you know, this is historically, for me, having dealt with the EMA in the past when we were in the European Union, I remember I said that MHRA was the very first of these regulators, and it was always very good. Okay, you know, they have their bureaucratic moments like everybody does, but they're very sensible to deal with. And they really dominated. The European Medicines Agency used to be based in London. It was based on the MHRA, and it was sensible. And I really do feel that MHRA people being pulled out from the EMA did not help the EMA and its flexible, accommodating, and common sense worldview. Let's leave it at that. So, so MHRA for the moment will regulate it. Now, what happens in the worst case scenario that obeticholic acid comes off the Ocaliva, comes off the market in the UK or in Europe? Okay, well, Advanz, the company, have been very clear that the EU guidance and the EU regulations will allow people to continue to take it on a compassionate basis. Okay. So the commitment from the company, and we must support them and applaud them. They are devastated by this because they feel the weight on patients, and it's their jobs as well. So they are very clear that they will continue to make the drug available for people to take. Okay. So that means that even if it is withdrawn, there is still the legal cover to use it under certain conditions. So people may be surprised. I can still write a prescription for thalidomide. That will astonish people. But thalidomide is a very useful drug in certain clinical situations. It's very highly regulated. No ordinary doctor can prescribe it, but certain people are allowed to. We don't use it in PBC, by the way, don't worry. So that will be made available. So if you are taking obeticholic acid, then, you know, my view is you treat it on and even if it's taken away, you treat people on a case-by-case basis and make the right decision for you. That's very important, where clinicians mustn't feel that, must look after the best interest of their patients. They mustn't slavishly follow dogma, and that's where you're going to need, the foundation are going to need to help people to push back at, I must do this. No, you mustn't at all. The EMA guidance is very clear that people can continue with it if that is the right thing to do. We are optimistic.
What is the mechanism to do that? Is it quite difficult if a patient needs to get it on a compassionate basis, and we might have quite a lot of patients needing that? Is that a bit of a logistical nightmare, or is it quite easy to do?
So to be honest, it's for the UK, I can only talk about the UK, but what looks quite simple to you is quite a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare for us, because we write you a prescription. Behind, we have to fill in about 4 forms and submit them all because of the way in which it's reimbursed. So actually, it won't be that much more it won't be that different. They you know, the way in which it gets to people in the UK and the way in which it's prescribed actually wouldn't change. There would be a change in the paperwork behind the scene for us, but to be honest, it wouldn't be that much.
The patient as such. Yeah,
it is. I would be optimistic. There is also the opportunity to be able to prescribe it to new patients based on need. So if you can justify clinical need, and given what I said about there being particular mechanisms of action for this drug, and its proven safety, I can justify that to everybody, actually. And so there may be the opportunities around that. Part of the worry is that's fine for me because we take a sort of rounded worldview, but there may be clinicians who say, no, you know, we mustn't do that. Of course, behind all of this is another worry, which is that if other circumstances, I will be telling you that the latest data suggests that the combination of obeticholic acid and bezafibrate normalizes totally blood tests in 70% of people. Okay, the holy grail is normalization, and we're now getting over half of people normalizing. That's the future of PBC, and of course we lose that as well if we lose obeticholic acid, because you can't replace that bit. So you know, there is that other additional aspect, is that I can tell you now without any doubt combination therapy is the future, without a doubt. And actually the combination makes the itch problem go away, paradoxically. So we've got to guard the future with all of this. So I suspect this is bureaucratic madness. Behind it, there may be an element. Of there are people who are very strong advocates of bezafibrate, and in certain countries in particular, and there may be an element that this is, you know, a perverse way of advocating for a drug that you have a great deal of belief in. I deal with evidence, you know, data and experience, and as people again who are managed by me, we've probably treated more people in Newcastle with bezafibrate than anywhere else in the world, but we do it as an option in the right people. All we're asking for is the right to be able to use drugs that we are very comfortable with, we understand completely, have no concerns about safety in at all, be able to actually, as grown-up sensible doctors, make our decision. And these decisions are largely not made by doctors. Okay, so one of the people who wrote the negative reports about obeticholic acid, maybe I'm telling secrets and I shouldn't do this, but one of them is a pharmacist. Okay, so don't know about people on this call, but I don't know how much you feel your pharmacist knows about PBC. The other person who wrote a report kept talking about primary biliary cirrhosis. Okay. So that's part of the problem. Who do you trust more to make a decision? People like me or Marco Carboni or Cynthia Levy, or a pharmacist and somebody who hasn't heard the names changed?
I know, shocking, isn't it? Absolutely shocking.
So that's where we are. We will keep you up to date. I believe me, and for those of you who know me will know this, and for those of you who don't know me can probably guess this, I'm reasonably forthright in my view, and you know, we are pushing very, 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 very hard on this. This is just plain wrong. Okay.
Yeah. Just before we talk a wee bit more about what the foundation are doing, could I just touch on, somebody on Facebook's asked about if we know anything that might happen for the rest. So when we move out of, we've still talked about the US, Europe and the UK, potentially for Australia and New Zealand, if they would follow suit, depending on the decision taken, perhaps in the Europe and then in the US as well.
So I don't know is the short answer. So Australia is regulated separately. They have their own regulatory body. They too have no concerns about obeticholic acid. I would, part of the reason why we need to kick up a fuss. So you're just going to have to trust me on this one, as somebody who's treated more people with obeticholic acid, more people with fibrate, treated more people with PBC than anyone currently clinically active in the world. You're just going to have to, you know, listen to your colleagues, but also you're going to have to trust me. And I think and hope
and we do,
because I've done it for longer than anybody else, and I've managed more patients than anybody else, and we've been doing advanced therapy for more. There is no problem with this drug, right? Trust me, as long as you respect it and you use it correctly. But that's true of any powerful drug, okay? And it is without exception beneficial in people. It's the degree of benefit will vary from person to person, but either obeticholic acid on its own or in combination with a fibrate, with bezafibrate, that is, believe me, that is the close to the holy grail in all of this. Personally, I think the combination of obeticholic acid with one of elafibranor and seladelpar, I think you'll be in 90% normalizing blood tests with that. I think that is the end game, okay? And then we're into how do you get it out to people in a most effective way. So I think it's one of the newer drugs plus obeticholic acid is going to be definitive, but it won't be like that. So, you know, bezafibrate on its own, as if you take the sort of similar type of severity of PBC patients, you know, something like bezafibrate, maybe 15% of people will normalize their alkaline phosphatase. You look at elafibranor, it's about 15%. Seladelpar, it's about 25%. There's some oddities about the data. Obeticholic acid on its own about 10%. But there are, again, reasons for that. But alkaline phosphatase normalization with combination therapy is 70 to 80%. So it really, really is the combination which is definitive. And again, people will know from our clinic, we use a lot of combination therapy in people. And I think the daft thing about this thing is frequently we've given bezafibrate to people. It's not really had the effect we'd like it to. And so we add additional therapy. We're going to be taking that away. And we're then going to be able to, you know, if you have to do that, you're going to be able to measure people's deterioration over a short period of time, all because of removing a drug which you don't think works when it clearly does work. And I think, you know, anybody who feels they've ever benefited by obeticholic acid, drop Ursula a line, because she doesn't know. She is a doctor, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
She is a doctor, by the way. She's not to blame for this, by the way. This is Europe. This is EU bureaucracy, to be honest.
Yeah, so we're galvanising. We're doing everything we can to support our patients in Europe in terms of the recommendation. So
I'm sorry. I'm on full rant mode now. So by arguing about this, we argue about the particular jurisdiction. Okay, so the writing 5,000 letters to Ursula von der Leyen. That wave of kind of, you know, if I was you, I'd get angry about this. Okay, now's the time to get angry. If you think that inequality in access to care in healthcare systems is a problem. This is a massive problem compared to that, because there's nothing to be unequal about if you take away the therapies, right? So by kicking up, okay, that will hopefully persuade other regulators to say, hang on a second, you know, we're not going to, you know, there's a danger somebody might turn around and say, well, they've had a good look at it, they've decided it doesn't work, so, you know, we'll agree with them. But if there is such a fuss about it, then it will persuade people not to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the argument we're using the MHRA, which is, this is so controversial and so wrong, and people you trust and are sensible are saying it's wrong, and the patients are saying it's wrong. You please don't just rubber stamp it, because, you know, and that, you know, I'll be honest, there is a worry with the election and the mood music about it, is that, you know, the I Heart EU, you know, brigade, you know, would see just rubber stamping things as a sort of badge of their affection for the EU. And on this occasion, honestly, it's not the right thing for people. It really, really, really isn't. Don't rubber stamp people's decisions.
Yeah, our petition on change.org does cover the decision regarding OCA, but also the model of the trial itself, because we know that if that model's then used again moving forward, so it's twofold, if you like, in terms of what it's covering. So it's really important, and we really, really need your help. So please do what you can. Have a look at the website. If you need any help to do anything that we ask on the website, please just give us a call as well. We're here to help you on that as well. But it's really important that we stand together.
It's not, it's the bottom, I'll shut up on this in a second, is that the key thing is it's not as bad as people think it is, okay? Because the vast majority of people should be able to continue with this if they wish to do it, okay? And making sure clinicians are aware of that. And also, I cannot emphasize this enough, as Mo did, this is not about safety. If a drug was withdrawn because it's unsafe, that is a completely different matter, okay? Clearly, if there's a safety concern, that's a completely different matter. This is benefit, okay? Because they won't you know, they've decided that all the evidence of its benefit is inadmissible, and the only bit of admissible evidence is the one thing that couldn't answer it one way or the other, in simple terms. And that is the triumph of dogma. That's the triumph of dogma over sensitive logic. And honestly, I mean, I hate to think if Robert had been there, but the number of po-faced comments about we're only doing this to look after patients on behalf of patients without involving patients, I think he literally had to scrape him off the ceiling.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the foundation weren't involved in that decision. That's not something that we are often able to be part of the conversation for things, but we weren't on this occasion. So we are getting ready. We're looking at a few things, so please check out the website, as I've mentioned, and if you need any help, give us a call. We're also looking to do a protest at the European Commission building in Brussels. We're looking at a date towards the end of the month for that. Please keep an eye on our socials for more information on that if you would like to join us in that. And we will share any new information we have as it comes in, any updates from Professor Jones as well. We'll make sure that's shared on our website for everyone to see. But please do what you can. Have your voice heard along with us, and we will do what we can.
I think that probably covers it. If there are specific questions, we can. But I thought it was just because
that's been excellent. I think it's just a really good opportunity just to chat through what's happened, let people understand it in a bit more detail, and also have the opportunity to ask questions as well. But I'm really pleased that I've got you until 3:30, because I do have some other questions for you as well. So we'll move on to them now. But if anyone has any other questions about OCA, please just pop it in the chat, and I will keep an eye for that as well. So our first question that came in for the regular Q&A session today was a patient who's got in touch to say that she has PBC. Her daughter has the AMA-M2 antibody with an ALP of 80 and a slightly high GGT. Does she have PBC, and should she be on urso now, or is it a watch and wait situation?
Gosh, that's a really good question. So, one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, what does this mean for my daughter? Okay, because people are obviously very aware of the female preponderance for it, and people are also aware of the ages at which you get PBC, and they'll maybe be diagnosed in their 40s or 50s, and they will have a daughter in their 20s, and it's a reasonable and legitimate concern. So what I'll do is I will give you the general view, and then I'll talk specifically about the story that Mo just said. So in general, it's important to realize that PBC is a little bit more common in the relatives of patients with PBC, but it is not a genetic disease. It's not inherited. So what do I mean by that? So there are certain conditions where there is a gene abnormality that runs through families, haemophilia and Queen Victoria's family, and cystic fibrosis. And so anybody who has that gene will get that disease. And so there's a very high inherited component, multiple people in the same families. Okay, so those are what are called single gene disorders. PBC is an example of a much commoner situation, which is that things to do with how you're built, which are genetic, kind of play a role in it. But it's only a role. So we all know families where there's lots of cancer. We all know families where there's lots of heart disease. And there are also families where there's lots of autoimmune disease. And it's a little bit like that. So there are lots of genes that contribute to how your immune system's built. And some of them give you a more active immune system. Some of them give you a less active immune system. And it's that mix that's important. So the best analogy I always use is height. Okay, it's exactly the same. You take two parents, and there is a formula you can calculate from the height of the parents what the height of their children will be. Okay, simple as that. So it's very predictable, and height is almost entirely genetically determined. Tall families have tall children, and so you can work it out from that. Now, your height is sort of determined by lots of genetic things, and to be very tall is normal, to be very short is normal. They're just different, and it's part of that mix. Okay, so PBC, it's to do with what your immune system, how your immune system is built. In simple terms, you're a little bit too sort of quick to turn on an immune response and a little bit too slow to turn it off. And actually the turning it off is the more important aspect of it. So there's a general tendency to have an immune system that's kind of straining at the leash a little bit to do things. Now, that kind of active immune system is very useful. We saw remarkably few real issues in COVID, for example, with PBC patients. So an immune system that's quite aggressive is a nuisance if you get an autoimmune condition, but actually in a world of infectious disease, it can be an advantage. That's why these genes are in the population. And over time, because we're the survivors, our parents and grandparents survived, TB and diphtheria and all of those things, the sort of tendency in the population is to have slightly stronger immune systems over time. So these things are getting commoner. So how your immune system is inherited, and if you've got a slightly more aggressive immune system, then you will often have relatives who've also got autoimmune conditions, and that puts you at risk of PBC. So that then applies to the next generation of people. Okay, so there is a loose association. It is not a strong association. What it means in numbers terms is that a daughter of a mother with PBC has something like a 10 to 20-fold chance of getting PBC increase. Okay, now that sounds like a lot, but PBC only affects 30 per 100,000 in the population, so it still works out at less than a 1 in 100 chance, right? And that's pretty well worked out. So there is an increased risk, but it's actually a very rare condition, so be aware of it. So what do I do with people who are worried about? So if you had a daughter with PBC and said, should I get my daughter tested? We would say we normally don't do that, because you then have to declare it on health insurance and travel insurance and all of those things. And actually the chances of you having a problem with it are pretty low. So what we suggest to people is be aware of it and tell your relative that if they ever found to have, itch or fatigue or abnormal liver blood test, then just to be aware of the risk, and therefore it should be tested for early. That's our standard advice. If people are really worried about it, really, really worried about it, then the best thing for their as an individual is to test them. Okay, so if mum's had a liver transplant, you know, I'm not going to be able to say this is a very low impact, low risk condition. So there are situations where for that person the right thing to do is to do a test, expecting that to be negative. Okay. Now, if you have a daughter who's been found to be AMA positive for whatever reason, you then get into the category of what do you do when you are AMA positive? And the reason why this is a really good question is that it's right on the edge. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So AMA positivity indicates that you're kind of at risk of PBC. Not everyone who's AMA positive will get PBC, but all the people who are going to get PBC will have AMA, if you know what I mean. Okay, now technically you need 2 out of the 3 of AMA, a positive liver biopsy, and a elevated alkaline phosphatase. Okay, so 2 out of the 3 to make a diagnosis of PBC. We don't biopsy people, so de facto it's AMA and alkaline phosphatase. By definition, your daughter doesn't have those because she's got AMA and doesn't have an elevated alkaline phosphatase. 80 is normal. But gamma GT is an equivalent of alkaline phosphatase, all right? So it often goes up a little bit before alkaline phosphatase, right? Okay. So it's right on the edge. So what would I do in this situation? Well, I would have a conversation along the lines that we're doing, which is saying that PBC is one of those things that happens. It's easy to treat, and it's easier to treat the earlier you treat it. And to treat it early, you have to diagnose it early, right? We can play this whichever way you want. If you want me to write a letter saying you haven't got PBC, technically you haven't got PBC because you don't meet those criteria. However, to you as somebody who's looking to the future and family and jobs and wanting to live a very long life, you've got enough PBC for me to want to treat you, to be honest. So in that situation, where there's a family history, where there's already been an AMA found, and it's a raised gamma GT, that is so close to PBC, I would take the advantage of having a really early treatment. That will return to normal. She'll never get abnormal alkaline phosphatase and will never have any problems. The advantage of not having PBC in terms of insurance has actually been lost because she's been shown to be AMA positive anyway. So they're going to have to declare that. So to be honest, that's a situation I would almost always suggest treating with urso. If she turned around and said, oh, I don't want to take any tablets, can't be bothered, then watch it every year. But if it were a member of my family, I would say, you know, I would get on top of this whilst you've got the chance. There's no, what's the reason not to? Urso is really easy to tolerate and it's very safe. So that's what I would tend to do. I don't tend to treat people just on the basis of AMA, but we have done in people who are very symptomatic. Itch sometimes seems to go with AMA rather than the disease itself. I've certainly treated people for PBC itch who are AMA positive with normal liver blood test, but a raised gamma GT with an AMA, you're into semantics. And I would take a rueful reflect on the vicissitudes of life, having returned my liver function totally to normal and reassuring myself I will never have any problems with it, and say, aren't I lucky it's been picked up early? Would you agree with that, Mo?
Yes, I would. And I think talking about it the way you have there, explaining it in general and then a bit more specific about that question is really helpful for people, because I know it is a concern within the community. Personally, I have a daughter, so it's something I've thought of as well, you know, so we do think about it. So I think just understanding the background and more general has been really helpful, certainly for to understand the bigger picture, but also specifically for this patient as well. So thank you for that.
2 factoids. One is having a mum with PBC does not mean you get worse PBC, okay? So it doesn't change the nature of it. What it does do is change the nature of the concern about it, because obviously you'll know much more about PBC because you will see what's happened to your mother. So so that's the first thing. So it does not make the disease worse. It's diagnosed at a younger age, but it's diagnosed at a younger age because of awareness rather than anything else, okay? So there's no reason. Family PBC is not worse, it's just there's more awareness of it. And then the other one is, in all of the 30 years I've been doing this, have never once seen PBC in the son of somebody with PBC. So we've gone all sexist and talked about daughters. So I have a kind of that's incredibly rare criterion, which is that if I haven't seen it in 30 years, that's really rare. So I've never, suddenly it will be tenfold less automatically because PBC is tenfold less common, but I've literally never seen it. Okay,
that's interesting though, isn't it? That is, yeah. We've actually had a question that ties in a wee bit with that, just around the AMA. So we've got a patient who was diagnosed with PBC in February 23 with a positive AMA. Since tested negative for AMA twice, does this mean I don't have PBC but something else?
Oh,
she does have raised ALP and she's been on Urso for a year.
Yeah. Okay. So again, a really good question. In medical exams, medical exams, they give us they give us hypothetical situation. Unfortunately, I'm way past all of this, but and they're called grey cases. Okay, grey cases, because it's a mixture of things where it's not a simple black or white with it all there. It's nuanced, right? And this is the last one was a grey case, and this is another one. So at the end of the day, raised alkaline phosphatase indicates what we call cholestasis. So that indicates, indicates to me something important, maybe not to the European Medicines Agency, it doesn't matter to them. Sorry, I promised I wouldn't. So alkaline phosphatase is a marker of poor bile flow. Okay, you've got to be careful with it because it can also be, it can be released by bone as well. So people with Paget's disease, for example, with bone will have a raised alkaline phosphatase. That's normally quite easy because you can measure the different types. And actually, that's the main reason we measure gamma GT. So if we would measure a gamma GT just to check that alkaline phosphatase was from the liver, so they would tend to go together. So that
was something I only found out recently, that ALP was present in the bones and other areas of the body as well. It was interesting.
Yeah. So gamma GT. So alkaline phosphate is really useful because it's very predictable in PBC and it does predict what's going on. Gamma GT is a bit up and down, and for some reason GPs are convinced it's always to do with alcohol, which is incorrect. So the number of people that have PBC and the GP will write along and say, "I've now discovered that I'm an alcoholic because the gamma GT's up." Nah, it's just the same. So basically, if you've got raised alkaline phosphatase, you've got cholestasis, and it's not bony origin, you've got cholestasis. And so Urso is a very logical. So Urso is the standard treatment for cholestasis of any cause. So we use it in anybody and everybody who comes in with cholestasis, doesn't matter if it's genetic or post-transplant or with a drug or anything. Urso will soothe the bile ducts. It'll damp the injury to the bile ducts down a little bit. So the use of Urso is really, is there enough of an ALP phos elevation linked to the liver to justify using it? And you need anything at all. Now, AMA, your immune system forgets, okay? That's why you need to have boosters for vaccines, right? So you need to have boosters. So your immune system will forget over time. PBC starts as an immune condition. The first injury to the bile ducts we think is immune. And after that, it just becomes this self-sustaining. The injury to the bile ducts leads to more bile being retained and leads to more injury to the bile ducts. And so round and round it goes. So in a way, the immunity doesn't matter anymore because it's become a self-sustaining process. Bit like, if you're falling from a height, it isn't what you've fallen off that matters. It's the pavement you need to worry about. Okay. So what happened at the beginning of it, I know it's not a very good analogy, but what happened at the beginning of it actually in a way doesn't matter. It's what's going on now that matters. AMA will go up and down in PBC. In some people it will disappear. And technically it's a one-way street. So if you've ever been AMA positive, you are AMA positive. You don't go back to being AMA negative. You've switched states. And we would actually never measure AMA again in somebody who's got a raised ALP phos and AMA at a significant titer. There is no point, because if the AMA is still elevated, well, you've not added anything. And if the AMA has disappeared, they've still been AMA positive and you still treat it as PBC. So it's likely that this is the immune component just fading away. But the raised ALP phos means that there is something going on. And so therefore you would simply continue with the treatment. So it probably suggests, we would think that still indicates you've got PBC, but the immunology has just changed a little bit.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Next question we've got is a 35-year-old female with Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Yep.
Did I say that right? Am I getting better?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Suffer from dry eyes, and they're frightened that they have PBC. They have itchiness in their legs when they come out the shower in the morning, and over every few months they have some discomfort in their right upper abdomen as well.
Yes.
They had a liver function test last summer, which was fine. Should I get checked out? They're quite worried.
Okay, right. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and you did say it well done, that sounded quite patronising, didn't it? Well done, you.
But I never do, so that's the problem.
So Hashimoto's thyroiditis is autoimmune thyroid disease. So it is an underactive thyroid caused by the immune. So it's the commonest type of thyroid disease. Okay, I think it was Dr. Hashimoto who named it. As an aside, we used to run when people still had fun, a Christmas quiz for the junior doctors, and it was, where did the name come from? So was it the doctor, was it the patient, or was it the place? Okay, so Hashimoto is Dr. Hashimoto, Crohn's disease is Dr. Crohn. We always used to catch them out with Bornholm disease, which is a respiratory infectious disease, and I always used to ask them who Dr. Bornholm was, and in fact it's a small island off Denmark. So there you go. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is an autoimmune thyroid disease where the immune system attacks the thyroid and means you don't produce enough thyroid hormone. So the effects of that are those of not having a thyroid hormone, which is weight gain, bowel change, skin change, and things like that. So it's one of the commonest autoimmune conditions. Dry eyes and dry mouth, that's Sika syndrome. That is an autoimmune process affecting the salivary glands and the tear ducts. Okay. Now, remember what I said before about autoimmunity? It's all about how your immune system's built. Tall parents have tall children. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they will get the same immune conditions. People with a family history of cancer don't all get the same cancer. So in this situation, you can get different immune conditions. And that can be in family members, or it can be in the individual themselves, or a mixture of both. Okay. So Hashimoto's and Sika syndrome, Sjogren's, are both autoimmune conditions. They are also the two commonest autoimmune conditions in PBC. So there is a bit of a spectrum of this. So type 1 diabetes, so the insulin diabetes, is actually pretty uncommon in PBC. We don't see an association with that. But things like thyroid disease and Sika are very common. So those are both PBC associations. Okay, once you have one autoimmune disease, the chance of getting a second one is high. Once you have two, the chance of getting a third one is very high. Okay, so in this situation, it would be something that you would absolutely think about. Now, the one small catch is that you can get dry skin and itch with thyroid disease, okay? And you can even get AMA rarely with autoimmune thyroid disease, okay? So the immunology of it is a little bit complicated, but it would fall into the scientific criterion set that we use, which is that if it walks like a duck, has feathers and quacks, chances are it's a duck. Okay, so if you have an autoimmune history like that and you have symptoms suggestive of PBC, then you need to have a very close eye kept on it for PBC. Okay, the caveat is that the itch can be a feature of the thyroid disease rather than PBC. So it's one of the things you need to be careful about. Now, so AMA being checked, and then liver function tests, regularly. Now, if I was to construct my own grey case, if you had classical PBC itch, people sometimes say, how do you know if itch comes from PBC? It's the easiest thing in the world because it's this deep under the skin. It affects the palms of the hands, the sole of the feet. It's nothing like any other form of itch, right? It's really straightforward. So if I was talking to you and I really believed that this was a PBC itch, then again, there is enough here to make me have a conversation with you that would be along the lines of, it's a reasonable thing to think of treating this. Okay, it's not unreasonable. I wouldn't automatically do it, but I would give that to you as a thing for you to think about. Here are the cons, here are the pros. And actually, you'd then give, a trial of urso. Remember, you can always stop a drug. Trial of urso, trial of itch therapy. And if the itch goes away with PBC therapy, then you've got an answer. At the end of the day, PBC is the easiest disease to treat in the world. So as you diagnose it early enough, you act on the diagnosis, you look at the response to therapy, and people still allow us to use the drugs that transform the disease. As long as you meet all those criteria, it's an easy disease to treat. So don't miss an opportunity to get really early treatment in, because that gives you if you diagnose PBC in the first year of it and your blood tests return to normal with treatment, you can guarantee that you will never have problems from your PBC. And medicine is there are very few guaranteed, but I can give you that guarantee based on all the experience we have. It's all about timing.
So I've just said the patient has mentioned that she's worried. I would just say to her, if you want to have a chat with us on the helpline, please just reach out and give us a call, and we can have a chat about it on the phone as well.
And there's something important in here. What I've done is, it kind of goes back to the EMA conversation, doesn't it? Is that you can be didactic. Here are those criteria. You do not meet those criteria, therefore you do not have it. But life is more complicated than that, and it's always more nuanced. And the point here, maybe this is what specialist clinics do, is that the strict diagnostic criteria are really a starting point, okay? But it's never as simple as that with people, okay? And so just because it doesn't rigidly fit those things doesn't mean there isn't something going on. And I think that's the frustration with the EMA, is that there was a rigid, we're not going to look at the whole of this complex picture. We're going to look at one bit and be dogmatic about it. So, but these are just the discussions that we would have, and it's got to be a decision that people end up being comfortable with. And there are pros and cons. I mean, people sometimes say, I don't want to take tablets. There are tablets and there are tablets, and urso is pretty straightforward in most people, and probably it's actually best thought of as a vitamin. Actually, vitamins are things your body needs and naturally produces, but just you don't have enough, and that's exactly the case for urso. Our bodies naturally produce it, and people with PBC just don't naturally have enough. So it's in essence a vitamin.
We have a patient asking if they take urso for life, 66 years old and newly diagnosed. So
I would. I would. We had a little outbreak. I mean, you know this, Mo. There was a little outbreak in some places of stopping urso when the blood test went back to normal, which is a bit like stopping your high blood pressure tablets because your blood pressure is normal. It just indicates it's working. So we recommend urso for life in everybody. Even after transplant, there's no evidence that it stops the recurrence of it. Just get into the habit of it. I think one of the things about urso is that it takes a long time to get in the system, a long time to get out of it. So if you forget a dose, doesn't matter. If you go on holiday and forget your tablets for a week, it doesn't matter. As long as you pick it up, it's the long term. The average level of taking it over the year needs to be at a certain level. So it's if you go on holiday and forget your antihypertensives, you're going to have to get hold of some. If you go on holiday and forget your urso, you don't need to. If it's steroids, you do. If it's urso, you don't. So it is quite an easy drug to take like that.
Okay, just another question that sort of follows on from what you were mentioning there. Can your biochemistry be normal, but the condition is still progressing? We've got good questions today. We've got really good questions today.
Very good. Very, very good questions. The answer to that is probably, okay. So across you'll often hear me talking about the metaphorical 1,000 PBC patients. So across 1,000 PBC patients, the disease is utterly predictable in terms of the percentages of people that have different aspects to it. Okay, so it's very predictable, very well understood. The problem is, as you go from 1,000 down to 100 and then 10 and then 1, obviously the extent to which the 1 obeys those rules isn't necessarily the same thing. Okay, so instantly you've got that 90% of women. So we tend to talk about women with PBC and that characteristic thing, but 10% of men actually have quite different disease. So it's already generalizations are problematic. It's a bit like my St James's Park and Newcastle United analogy, that if you were to take 50,000 people in the stadium, if you were to pull one person out of the crowd, are they representative of the crowd? Well, they could be a fat Geordie bloke without a shirt on, in which case they are, but they could be a grandmother taking her grandchildren to their first football match, in which case they're not. So on average, normal biochemistry equals non-progression of the disease. But I've certainly seen people who have progressed who've got normal biochemistry. I admit that's in the pre-therapy days, and it might be different. So this has been looked at recently by the global PBC group. And really important question is, what should we look at long-term for follow-up? Traditionally, we've done it with biochemistry. The question is, should we do it with FibroScan as well as biochemistry? And the answer from that study is that you get most of the information from the biochemistry. Normal blood tests equals no risk of progression, but you get a little bit more information if you also do FibroScan. So a FibroScan value of less than 10 and normal biochemistry equals no risk in the future. So the caveat to that, so normally biochemistry would indicate no risk of progression, but you would also probably want to have a FibroScan as well. Now, if you've got normal biochemistry and a really good FibroScan, you don't need to keep doing that. You've kind of got a baseline, but it's a little bit, just the biochemistry is a little bit two-dimensional. You just need a little bit, and three-dimensional always gives you more information, doesn't it? So provided that biochemistry was accompanied by a good FibroScan, then I would be happy. But most of the data comes from actually the biochemistry, or it could come from the FibroScan alone. But because blood biochemistry is easier to do than a FibroScan, you need to kind of get FibroScan alone.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of questions around other things being related to PBC. Is insomnia related to PBC? So yes is the short answer. Sleep is the kind of the figure hovering in the shadows of PBC symptoms. Okay. And it's a particular thing of mine that we talk about a lot in the symptoms clinic. So it's a truism that people who have problems with PBC symptoms almost always have problems with sleep. And people with PBC who sleep completely normally almost never have PBC symptoms. So there's some connection going on there. Don't know which way it goes. It could be lots of different things. But I'm a simple soul, and I sometimes think if we can get people sleeping normally, we are likely to solve a lot of these problems. Okay. Now, sleep abnormality, it comes in two flavors in PBC, and people usually have both. One is a tendency to want to sleep during the day, and the other is a tendency to not be able to sleep at night. So I talk about black and white, you know, all the black is at night and all the white is during the day, and people are just a bit grey. So the sleep kind of leaks into the day, and then people struggle at night. So that's common. And the first thing to think about with poor sleep is itch. Okay, always itch, because itch has an effect on the brain. So if you think about you know, waking up with a mosquito on your skin, you know, your brain is programmed to be aware of insects walking on your skin, because insects pass on infections. Okay, so you know, if a fly lands on your leg, it will wake you up, right? And that's a protective evolutionary reaction to swat it off. So the problem is when you get itch, it is subverting that signal to your brain that there's something irritating on the skin, and so your brain is constantly alerted. Okay, so I always, again, with my hyper scientific way of thinking about it, it's like leaving your TV on standby overnight. So your brain is left on standby, I think, with itch, so you never sleep properly. And so the questions we ask about itch when you're thinking about treatment, first off, is, you know, how bad is it? Is it bad enough to need treatment? But the other question is, does it affect your sleep? And by that I mean, do you struggle to go to sleep with it,
or if you wake up for another reason, do you struggle to go back to sleep with it, or does it wake you up? And the moment somebody says yes to any of those, treat the itch, right? Because it has such a knock-on effect. There are some people with sleep disturbance who do not have itch at all, although we will often treat subclinical itch to try and treat the sleep disorder. So there are some people who just have, and this is part of the brain fog syndrome in PBC. And shameless plug coming now, we are about to start the Umacrine golexanolone trial, okay, which is the most exciting trial in PBC for a long time, which is about the brain fog. You'll hear much more about it. It's really important landmark trial, first one really looking at this with a new drug, and that drug was discovered as a potential drug in PBC because it reverses sleep abnormality. Okay, so that's how it all came about. It was the people who developed the drug knew the stuff we'd done on sleep and said, hang on a second, our drug works on that sleep pattern. What do you think? So we think sleep is at the heart of it. Insomnia itself has lots and lots of different causes, you know, sleep apnea and all of those things. So there's a whole sort of process to go through, but it is part of it. And we do think that if we correct sleep back to normal, then it's one thing. And sleep is one of the things that, as I said, we talk about all the time in the sleep clinic. And shameless plug number 2 is that with all of the shenanigans about the EMA, drug regulation, new drugs, and also some of these questions about sleep and also the symptoms and new therapies, the 3rd edition of the book is on its way. I am busy writing it as we speak. When I first wrote it, I thought, that's it, you know, we've written the book. And then 2 years later, had to update it, and now we're going to have to update it again. So if anybody, if there are topics,
so much happening, isn't it? Yeah.
If there are topics you would like it to be covered in the book, anybody's welcome to email me, david.jones@ncl.ac.uk. We can have a crack at covering them. So it's going to gradually expand to cover all these things. So if one of the things is, where do I find out about this evolving therapy landscape, the book will be one of the things that comes along. But watch out for the human, right? Watch out.
Yeah, I was going to go back to that. So go back to shameless plug number 1. That's something that we've been supporting them on. So there's information in the latest Bare Facts about that. We're looking for people, if they're interested in taking part in the trial, please reach out. There's an email address in the Bare Facts. It's answers@pbcfoundation.org.uk, but you could also reach out to me direct at mo@pbcfoundation.org.uk.
And you know,
very exciting.
It is very exciting. And you know, of course, no drug works until you go through trials and all of the ups and downs. We've heard some of those things, but I genuinely think that this is potentially the new dawn in terms of managing this, which is the last really big challenge in PBC. Now, you may all be going, oh God, you know, trials, and then they'll ignore the evidence. Strangely, the problem with PBC is a treatment now predicting risk in the future is difficult, because the future can be 10 or 20 years away. That's the problem. And symptom improvement is actually going to be a much more straightforward way to get drugs approved, because if you take the drug and no longer have the symptom, it's in the here and now. So in case you're worried about going into a trial because at the end of all of this, they might ignore it, or actually for symptoms, it's much, much easier. Okay, and it may well be that elafibranor or seladelpar may get licensed on the basis of their itch benefits, which are in some ways simpler to look at. So symptoms, ironically, for years people wouldn't take symptoms seriously, and regulators had a real problem with it, and it's flipped all the way around. MHRA, I can tell you, are really interested in symptom-directed therapy, because so MHRA has much more focus on the patient need than the other regulators do. They really do listen to it, and they're really interested in symptom-targeted therapy, which is obviously music to my ears, because that's what we need to improve.
The brain fog and fatigue study, there's information in the latest Bare Facts on that as well. You can view that online on the website.
So somebody's included about the Oaks trial. Okay.
Yeah. So
the Oaks trial was the daddy of these. So this is a trial of obeticholic acid given for control of brain fog. In answer to the question, it is about to stop recruiting in a few months' time. It is finished almost finished in terms of recruiting people, and then it will be read out. So at the moment, there is no answer from the obeticholic acid trial. It will be coming shortly, and given that we've been told there isn't enough evidence of the benefits of obeticholic acid, obviously trials of obeticholic acid remain very important because we need better evidence. So that one is more restricted in terms of its access. It's only really been done in Newcastle, and is recruiting for people who have been in the Oaks trial. The protocol, the kind of criteria to go into the golexanolone trial are almost the same. So anybody who did Oaks is likely to be suitable for the golexanolone trial, and we're approaching all the people who've done the Oaks trial to see if they would like to go into it. And most of them found it, I mean, all of them found it, I think, a very positive experience and very interesting. So so there is a direct, we deliberately used a very similar set of criteria to make it easy to move from one to the other. So Oaks is about to finish, and then golexanolone comes along, but it's going to be available in more centres around the country, so it's therefore a better trial in terms of it's funded by the company rather than, you know, Oaks is a science study, if you like.
And I'd just like to say as well that our patient community are so supportive in terms of trials and studies, and are really willing to help out whenever possible. We've had a lot of our patients who have already helped with the fatigue and brain fog trial at the study point before we move forward to the drug trial itself, and we're really appreciative of that.
Yeah, I kind of said this about the PBC community. Whenever you talk to companies that, you know, who people who oversee trials, they just can't believe the buy-in and the extent to which people support this whole agenda. And you know, I get this all the time. These people are amazing. They fill in everything, they do everything, they turn up every time, and it's a real tribute to you all. But I also feel that we contribute to this by involving you. Research isn't something that's done by faceless people to you. It is a community endeavor, and I think the whole of that works, you know. And I think the foundation have been the most extraordinary supporters of research over the years, because that's where treatments come from, right? You know, that, and I think what frustrates, going back to the obeticholic acid stuff, what frustrates us more than anything else is that all of this scientific progress, all this effort put in by patients, time commitment and all of that, it's to kind of take a bureaucratic way of looking at it. That isn't really in the spirit of what we're trying to do. Nobody wants to approve drugs that don't work or are harmful. Of course we don't. But to make a bureaucratic decision to ignore what's right in front of your own eyes is I just find extraordinary.
Something that was mentioned when we've been working on the fatigue and brain fog trial was, when patients start to get involved in the clinical trial part, is to think about yourself as part of the scientific team and what you're contributing to that trial. And I love that. I love that way of thinking about it, you know, and just to let patients understand the difference that they are making by that, and the gifts they're giving to their future patients. It's special, very special.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And you know, and people are so, I mean, we've got people, you know, who come to our clinic who are on their 4th trial, you know.
Yeah, we always make sure we get as much information out about trials as possible to make sure patients are aware of what's going on as well.
And the other thing about it is that there will be people who don't want to go into trial, can't do it, childcare arrangements, you know, it's only taking, you know, it's only work, you know, only being done in Truro or something, and you live in Aberdeen. There are always reasons why people can't, and that's absolutely fine. But there are always studies you can take part in. So that's one of the reasons why I think some of the survey work and the questionnaire studies are also important, because it means everybody can take part, even if geography means you can't, or time means you can't do the other things. But even if you can't take part in the trial, people should be optimistic, because trials are taking place, because, you know, it should give you reassurance that progress will surely come. And PBC historically, I mean, ironically, given the debates we're having, has a far higher success rate in its trials than almost any other disease. So 8 out of 10 trials in PBC have been positive, i.e. the idea has been correct. And that has therefore moved forward. And if you look at, you know, other diseases, it's less than 10% sometimes. So, and that, you know, is to do with people would like to think having good ideas and writing protocols correctly, but then people fine-tuning them, stress testing this, looking at the documentation and spotting the problems with it. So it's the detail that makes all the difference with it. So that's one of the reasons why companies like working in PBC, is because it's very, very, very high quality research. I mean, ironically, again, we keep coming back to this casual disregard of it all. Anyway, but there you go. I've said enough about it.
That's what's so frustrating, isn't it? Is that it's not just the decision; it's the model of the trial that's an issue as well moving forward, that could affect other stuff when we have got patients keen to take part. And
we told them.
Yeah. And if we don't fix it, we're worried it then goes on and impacts on some other new drugs as well.
Yes, well, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing, expect a different outcome, isn't it?
Yes. So please have a look at the website, look at the information that's there, do anything you can to help us, support us in this. And if you have any questions on it or need some support, please give us a call. Remember too that we're always at the end of the phone. If you've submitted a question for this week and I've not got to it, it will be held over for our next session. I'll pick up any outstanding questions on our socials as well for that. But if you need us in the meantime, we are here for you, so please reach out to us. Thank you, Professor Jones. Just so that you know that it'll always be an hour and a half moving forward now, just make sure that's in your diary. That's our time now, moving forward.
Look,
okay?
Look, I'll do this all day long, as you know. It's Miriam. Miriam, for those people who don't know, is the only person who's allowed to look at my diary, because if I have anything to do with it, it's chaos. So you need to be really nice to Miriam and say, can we possibly book an hour and a half? I do think an hour and a half, it's better to do that, because we always have so many questions. They are so good, and they're always so different. After all these years of doing this, we're still getting original, important questions. And I think things will crop up, like the obeticholic acid stuff, and it is a useful forum. I suspect it's probably helpful to have me tell you straight in person about it, rather than writing a piece. Do you know what I mean? Is that
definitely
you can look into my eyes and see whether I believe this or not. Okay.
And also what we've done with quite a lot of our videos recently is, if you've talked about something in detail, like today you spoke about the hereditary part of it and the genetics of it, I take that and make it into just a little video in its own right, so people can go to the website. We can refer people to that if we get another question about it. And that's what is so important about these, is we're not just getting a bit of information for the one patient, we're getting that general stuff for the whole patient community as well. So we really appreciate
my children were excited to find I'd appeared on YouTube in various different forms, but I've never knowingly made it onto TikTok. Okay.
Oh, we'll need to see what we can do about that. We need to see what we can do about that. I'll get my daughter onto that. She'll get you on TikTok.
I agree with Mo completely. I think these little bite-sized guidance is a good way to do it. Almost a library of those things.
And I think just hearing it, the information, rather than reading it, hearing it from our medical advisory board as well, is just really reassuring for patients.
On a genuine note with that, I mean, the advisors are a brilliant group of people. They are utterly committed to PBC. That's why they were invited onto the board. But they're really great people. They all have a perspective. They all have an experience. They all have an interest. They're all committed absolutely to PBC, and so opportunity to get that input, and we talk about things here that don't appear in textbooks and they don't appear in guidelines, because it's what I would call nous, right? These are the things that I'm familiar with, because I've done it for so long, thought about it for so long, and it's stuff you won't find anywhere else, because it's not it's tricks of the trade, let's call it that. And the great thing about having different people do this is, of course, they have their own different tricks of the trade. Now, just be aware that people may say slightly different things about situations. That's often because there is no right answer, if you like, but these are the things that we do. And that's what I encourage you to listen to as many of the Q&A people as you can, because you just get that different perspective, and I think people will find that interesting.
And also, I'd just like to say as well that all our doctors give their time for free for us. They come in, they dedicate time to us regularly. We always, when I reach out looking for dates, they're always very supportive, and we really do appreciate that. We really do. But 2 hours is going to be our next time frame that I'll be aiming for. Professor Jones, 2 hours. I'll speak to Miriam. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's been a really good one in terms of the OCA situation, I think, just to help put patients' minds at
Yeah, and please don't worry about it. We're on to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you need us, we're here. Just give us a call.
But please do drop Ursula van der Leyen an email. She'd love
get
to
onto
hear
the
from
website, and we'll help you support to do that as well.
You. Okay.
Thank you. Take care. See you later. Thank you. Bye.